All right, welcome back to Digital Learning. I hope you all had a wonderful spring break, restful. Hopefully there was something fun you were able to do and take your mind off all this craziness that we're going through now. But we got to get back to work today. If you would, go back and review some of those videos about World War I. I'm not going to review those right now. But we finished up World War I with the Allied powers winning, and at the end of the war, it's time to write a treaty. Now, this is one of the most famous treaties in world history. A lot of this takes place at Louis XIV's old palace, which hopefully you remember is called the Palace of Versailles, and therefore this treaty is going to end up being called the Treaty of Versailles. So, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so at the end of a war, the winners get to make all the decisions. So up here on the board, I've got the main winners, and these are the main guys who were making most of the decisions at this peace treaty: Britain, France, Italy, and the United States. Now tomorrow you're going to read, your assignment for tomorrow is going to be to read this section of the book, and you can look at their specific names of these leaders. But for today, the only one I need you to know is the American one. That was our president, Woodrow Wilson. You've probably heard of him. He's a pretty famous president. But those are the four guys making most of the decisions. I notice right here, Russia, you can see, I think, with the, slash through it, Russia wasn't present. Russia is, even though they played a major role in the victory, they're not present. They are in the middle of a Russian Revolution, which we will get to in the days ahead. They are in the middle of becoming communist. Right now, they are in the middle of a civil war. So they weren't represented at this meeting. So, but anyway, these are the four guys, the four countries and the four leaders who are going to make most of the decisions here at the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so you got all these leaders going to this meeting in Paris, and I'm sure our president didn't want to show up empty-handed. All these leaders come to the meeting with, some ideas they'd like to see in the final treaty. So our president came up with 14 ideas, and they're called Wilson's 14-point plan. Now, this isn't the actual treaty. These are his ideas that he would like to see in the treaty, and he comes up with 14 of them. Now, in Wilson and our president's opinion, these things would all lead to world peace. So that's what that's his goal here, is to create a situation where, like a lasting peace. And we'll see that's not really Britain and France's main goal. Our allies, our friends in this war, had a couple of different goals. But our president's main goal was to create like a world peace. So here is 14 ideas for creating world peace. Number one, no more secret treaties. Last time we had secret treaties, we ended up with, two different teams, the Triple Alliance, Triple Entente. You start seeing treaties, you start seeing alliances, and before long, you have these rival teams, and one little thing could create a huge world war. Freedom of the seas. I think that's talking about, Germany. Remember, they were just blowing up random ships. It was called unrestricted submarine warfare. So I think number two is suggesting, any boat should be allowed in any water without the fear of being blown up by some German submarine. Free trade, I think, is kind of talking about the same thing. Any country should be able to trade with any country without the fear of, being blown up or something like that by German submarines. Reducing the size of armies and navies, that's definitely talking about militarism. If you remember, before the war, one of the main causes, the A in main cause was, the M in main cause was militarism. The A were the alliances, but the M was militarism, building up armies, building up navies. And if everybody's building up their militaries, war is going to be very likely. So Woodrow Wilson says we should bring down the size of these armies and navies. 5 deals with imperialism. You had colonies all over the world. And without getting too specific, his 5th idea talked about adjusting the colonies, kind of redoing some of the imperialism stuff in a way that would lead to a world peace. Now, his 6th through 13th points, his 6th through 13th ideas are all about ways to change the map, in his opinion, which would lead to a lasting peace. And he was a big believer in self-determination. Why don't we let these countries determine for themselves what country they want to be in? And if you let people decide things for themselves, there'll be less bitterness, less resentment, and probably that would result in fewer wars and less violence. So, self-determination, letting people determine for themselves what country they want to be in. So that was a big idea of Woodrow Wilson's. And then the 14th, I wrote it the biggest, it's the most important. He thought there should be some general association of nations, some big group of countries that would protect great and small states alike. So what I want to ask you is there any big group of nations that kind of polices the world today and protects big and small countries alike, like a big group of countries that if one country's misbehaving, they group up and say, hey, you can't do that? We do have something like that today. It's called the United Nations, but back then there was no such group. So he's calling for a United Nations type group to kind of police the world and make sure all the countries of the world were behaving. If there had been one of these, maybe it could have stepped in and said, hey, Germany and Austria, y'all need to just kind of, chill out before this thing gets out of hand. So here are Wilson's 14 ideas for what he would like to see in the Treaty of Versailles, because he thinks these 14 things could lead to world peace. Okay, so all these gentlemen, these world leaders at this meeting, and like we said, Wilson, our president, had 14 ideas that he wanted to see put in the Treaty of Versailles. But unfortunately, our allies, Britain and France, they had different motivation at this meeting. See, where our president was worried about world peace and creating lasting peace, Britain and France were more worried about these 2 things. They want some sort of punishment or revenge against Germany. Now, when I say revenge, I don't mean that they want to go and start a war again, but they feel like Germany started this whole thing. Germany killed all these millions of human soldiers and civilians. Germany destroyed Europe. Germany destroyed cities, destroyed towns, destroyed countries, destroyed the economy. And they want to see Germany get punished, okay? And the other thing is they want to make sure Germany can't do this to them again. They're right next door to Germany, so that they want to feel safe again. They want to make sure Germany is too weak to invade them again. They want to make sure Germany is just not able to start another war. So these are their 2 main motivations: revenge or punishment for Germany, and then to make sure that Germany is not going to start another war. So our president comes in with world peace. These countries come in with these 2 goals. So we have a goal. Our friends have a couple of different goals. So it's going to lead to a lot of fighting and a lot of arguing and a lot of debating. But finally, they are going to come to a compromise, and it's going to be called the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so when all the debating and all the arguing was complete, you finally had a finished product. It was called the Treaty of Versailles, and it was signed and made official on 6/28/1919. which, by the way, was the 5-year anniversary of that assassination, which started everything off. So I'm not sure if they did it that way on purpose or if it was just coincidence, but this is the 5-year anniversary of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So of the 14 ideas that Woodrow Wilson brought to the meeting, how many do you think actually made it into the finished product? Only one. So remember we talked about how our allies and America, we weren't really seeing eye to eye. They had different motivations. We had different motivations. And as a result, only one of our president's ideas made it into the final product. And that was that League of Nations, which was that general association, like that United Nations type group that would sort of police the world and make sure everybody was behaving. Another big thing that this Treaty of Versailles is famous, or maybe infamous for, is the way it punished Germany. And remember, they wanted revenge. They wanted punishment for Germany, and that's going to happen. It's going to happen big time. Germany loses a significant amount of territory and land. Their military, was shrunk down. All these restrictions on size, where they could be. They even told Germany where they could and couldn't have soldiers in their own country. It'd be like if the world told America we couldn't keep our own soldiers in Texas because it was too close to the border. Like we told them, the world told Germany where they could have soldiers and where they couldn't. So just severe restrictions put on their military. But probably the most famous part of this is the war guilt clause. That is, it's called Article 231, and it's the part of the Treaty of Versailles which basically says all of World War I was Germany's fault. Like it was all put on Germany. And as a result, they get severely punished, and they're going to have to pay reparations. So that's when you have to pay money for damages that you caused. So if you think of all the damage that World War I caused, Germany has to pay everybody back for that. It ended up being, I want to say, $31 billion of reparations that Germany owed the rest of the world. And then other colonies from imperialism, the League of Nations was going to take those over. And when I say League of Nations, I mean Britain and France, basically. But the League of Nations was going to take those over. They were going to be called mandates, and they were going to give those colonies freedom when it was believed they could achieve and survive on their own, when they were ready for freedom. So anyway, Germany is, as you can see in the Treaty of Versailles, gets very, very, very punished. Okay, so the Treaty of Versailles was mainly just between the Allied countries and Germany. They're going to have to go back and sign other treaties with the other losing nations. And in each one of those treaties, the losers always lost land. For example, Austria-Hungary was a huge, big empire. After World War I, they're going to lose land, and they're going to have to be split up. Austria becomes its own new country. Hungary becomes its own new country. The Czechoslovakia shows up on the map, and then also Yugoslavia becomes its own country. Now, this is a globe from when I was a young boy back in the 80s. So Yugoslavia is still on this globe here, but on a modern day globe, Yugoslavia is not there anymore. Instead, it's broken up into Serbia and Bosnia and those neighboring countries, Croatia, countries like that. So Austria-Hungary splits up, loses a bunch of land. They also had to go back and sign a treaty with the Ottoman Empire. If you remember, the Ottoman Empire was a huge, huge empire once upon a time. Well, after World War I, they're going to lose most of their land, and after that, they're pretty much just present-day Turkey. Now, Britain and France take most of this land from them in the Middle East, and again, set them up as like mandates, which is kind of a word for colony. And Britain and France were going to kind of control them until they were ready for independence. And this is when you start seeing Western countries have a lot of influence in the Middle East. All right. Russia's actually on the good team. If you remember, Russia sacrificed so much. Like, they got whooped and whooped and whooped. They took one for the team because they made Germany split its army in half and fight a two-front war. And without Russia doing that, the good guys probably would have never won the war. So they sacrificed so much, played such a major role in the victory. But after the war, they're going to actually lose land. Which I don't know. I think it's kind of messed up, but Russia's going through this Russian Revolution, so now they're communists, and I think Britain and France and America just aren't sure about this whole communist regime. But anyway, even though Russia helped out tremendously, they are going to lose land at the end of this war. Romania gets some Russian land, Poland gets some Russian land. And then Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania all break away from Russia and win their independence. So I would imagine after losing millions of lives and money, millions of dollars worth of money and all the damage, this losing land at the end of it must have been a huge slap in the face to Russia. All right. Well, to wrap things up today, the Treaty of Versailles is known as a peace built on quicksand. And imagine building anything on quicksand, a house, a shed, a wall, whatever. If you build something on top of quicksand, you'll see it for a while, but eventually it's going to disappear, okay? And that's what a lot of people say the Treaty of Versailles was. Maybe it worked, maybe for a little while, but it just didn't last long. And you could probably even say this treaty, which was supposed to promote world peace, you could probably argue that it actually caused World War II. So overall, this treaty wasn't a very successful treaty. And a couple of reasons for that. First of all, we didn't sign it. That's a big one. And it's kind of ironic. The main thing that Americans, let me say this. In America, the Senate, the U.S. Senate, they're the ones who get to sign treaties, not the president. The U.S. Senate decides if we sign treaties or not. And the thing that our Senate, and you'll need to remember this next year for U.S. history, the thing our Senate disliked the most about the treaty was the one thing that our president put in the treaty. So our president's favorite part about the treaty was our Senate's least favorite part, and that was that League of Nations. Here's why. In this country, who basically decides when and where we go to war, when and where we send troops? It's basically our Congress, which our Senate is a part of. They were afraid that if we joined a League of Nations, that outside group could tell us where to go fight and where we had to send soldiers. And our Senate didn't want other countries to be able to tell us where and when we had to go fight. So that's the main thing our Senate didn't like about the treaty, was that League of Nations. So again, our president's favorite idea in the treaty was really the reason our Senate decided not to sign the treaty. So that's a big problem. We didn't sign the treaty. Another big problem was that war guilt clause. Remember, Germany got punished, like really punished, really punished. And, that's going to lead to some resentment and some bitterness and some hatred in Germany. And, when there's a country out there that's just really bitter and full of hate and full of resentment, that's going to lead to a war, and that's exactly what happens. And that also allows some crazy mustache-wearing dictator to go around making promises. Hey, I can make life better. I can make life better. So that punishment actually allowed a Hitler-like guy to rise up and take over. So those are a couple of the main reasons why this treaty just wasn't very successful. America didn't sign it. We didn't take part in the League of Nations, and it probably went a little overboard on punishing Germany. Some other things, Japan, we promised them the good guys promised them land and reward if they helped us out. They didn't feel like they got the land that they were entitled to. Italy came over to our team, same thing. They didn't feel like they got any benefits with this treaty. So Japan and Italy basically felt treated. Cheated. And that's going to lead to resentment with them as well. All right. And then finally, that League of Nations, building up to World War II, you're going to see the League of Nations was very weak. As Germany starts doing things leading to World War II, the League of Nations should have stepped in again, and made Germany behave. But as we're going to see, the United States is not a member of it, and then Britain and France are terrified of another war, so they're afraid to stand up to any Hitler-like guy being bad because they're afraid it would risk another war. So as we're going to see, the League of Nations is not going to be very successful at preventing another war because, again, we're not in it, and Britain and France are going to be too passive, and they're afraid they don't want to stand up to a bully because it could start another war. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Hopefully it was a good way to ease back into digital learning. Tomorrow I'll have you read over this stuff and take a quiz for tomorrow, but today it's just going to be watching this video. Please, if you haven't already done so, go back and make sure we're making up any of the previous quizzes that we missed, and also please send me an email once you make a quiz up, and that way I can go in and fix it for you. So anyway, hope you have a great Monday, and we will see you in a few days. All right, take care. Bye.